My name is Neil, and this is a story about the time I discovered something amazing deep in the jungle. I'm a biologist, someone who studies plants and animals, and I'd always dreamed of exploring rainforests to find new things. When I got the chance to visit the rainforest of Rio Verde, I was thrilled. This place was different from anything I'd ever seen. Thick trees, colorful birds, rivers, and the sounds of creatures I'd never heard before. After a long journey through rivers and thick forest trails, I arrived at a small village. The villagers were kind but kept to themselves. They were happy to see me and curious about why I was there, but they were also quiet and serious, like they knew things I didn't. One night, as we sat around a fire, I heard an old man speaking softly. I didn't know his language well, but I could tell he was telling a story that meant a lot to the people there. I watched everyone listen closely, and I knew this was no ordinary story. The old man's voice was deep and full of emotion. He talked about a creature, something almost magical. After the story, I asked a young boy who knew a bit of my language to help explain. He told me the story was about a giant creature, a protector of the forest. They called it Forest Guardian, and the villagers believed it had been around for many generations. According to the legend, Forest Guardian was not like anything else in the world. It was huge, with many legs, almost like a spider. It only showed itself to a few, and those who saw it were never the same afterward. I didn't know if I believed the story, but I was definitely curious. The next day, I was surprised when the village chief, the leader, motioned for me to follow him into the forest. I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as we went deeper into the jungle. We walked for hours, moving quietly and carefully. And there, half buried under plants and soil, was something that made my heart skip a beat. It was a skeleton, huge and strange. The bones were twisted and oddly shaped, with legs that were far too long, like something out of a fairy tale. I had never seen anything like it before. The chief watched me as I stared at the skeleton, his face calm but serious. I could see he wasn't surprised. He had probably known about this for a long time. I tried to ask him questions, but he only smiled and shook his head. It was clear that he didn't want to talk about it. The creature was sacred to them, something they respected and feared, and he didn't want to give away all its secrets. For the next few days, I stayed in the village, hoping to learn more. I asked the villagers if they knew about other creatures like Forest Guardian, or if they had stories about the forest. But whenever I mentioned the skeleton or the legend, they grew silent. They would change the topic or look away, avoiding my questions. I realized that for them, this was not a story to be shared with strangers. Then, one afternoon, something strange happened. I was out exploring near the edge of the village. It was perfectly round, with no trees or plants, just empty ground. And in the center, I saw something that made me shiver. A stone altar, with strange carvings that looked like spider legs. I felt like I had stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. When I returned to the village, I told the young boy about what I had seen. His face went pale, and he quickly told me that the clearing was forbidden. He asked me not to go back there, saying it was a sacred place where Forest Guardians sometimes appeared. His warning made me even more curious, but I respected his request and stayed away. For a few days, I kept to myself, focusing on my research and trying to respect the village's traditions. But one night, something happened that I'll never forget. I was woken up by whispers and footsteps outside my tent. The whole village was gathered, looking up at the trees, and I followed their gaze. High above, in the treetops, there was a massive web. It stretched across the trees like a silver net, glowing softly in the moonlight. And in the center of the web, I saw a shape. It was too big to be a normal spider, and it moved slowly, almost like it was watching us. The villagers were murmuring, some in prayer, others speaking in low voices. The chief stepped forward, looking calm but determined. He explained to me in broken words that this was Forest Guardian, and it was here because I had gone to the forbidden spot. He said the creature was a guardian of the forest, and my curiosity had disturbed it. The villagers began a ritual, chanting and holding small offerings up to the creature. The air felt odd, like something powerful was watching us. As the ritual continued, I watched the shape in the web slowly pull back, disappearing deeper into the trees. The villagers relaxed as the creature vanished, and I felt a sense of relief, too. A few years ago, in late November, something strange happened to me. I was in a place called Pinecrest Forest, a beautiful, quiet spot in the heart of Minnesota. The forest has tall trees, rushing streams, and small, hidden waterfalls. It was the kind of place that felt like a getaway from the world, a place to breathe and find peace. I lived in a nearby town, just a half-hour drive from the forest. Pinecrest was my favorite escape whenever things felt too loud or busy. On this particular evening, I decided to take a walk in the forest as the sun was setting. The light was golden, and a calmness hung in the air. With my binoculars and a small bird guide, I wandered along the trails, looking for birds or maybe a woodland creature. The fading sunlight filtered through the trees, giving everything a warm glow, and I felt at peace, though a strange sense of unease crept over me. As I walked deeper into the forest, I began to feel as though I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, watching from somewhere nearby. I brushed it off, focusing instead on spotting a few woodpeckers in the trees. I continued down the trail, crossing a small bridge over a stream, watching the water flow by and trying to calm myself. Then, out of nowhere, a horrible smell hit me. I've smelled bad things before. I work as a plumber after all. But this was something different. It was thick, like rotting meat that had been left out for days, sharp and sour. It made my stomach turn, and I had to cover my nose just to breathe. I looked around, wondering what could be causing the smell, but nothing was visible. The forest seemed still and empty, though the smell clung to the air. I took a few steps forward, determined to ignore the smell and keep enjoying my walk. But as I moved, I felt a chill creeping over me, as though the warmth of the evening was fading fast. Shadows grew longer, and the forest around me darkened. My unease grew, and I started looking around, hoping to see something that would explain what I was feeling. Suddenly, as I turned a corner in the trail, I froze. Ahead of me, near the edge of the path, was a strange-looking figure that is about 9 feet tall and incredibly thin, like skin stretched over bones. The head was that of a deer, complete with long, twisted antlers, but it looked unnatural, almost like a skull. Its eyes were empty hollows, but as I stared, I could have sworn I saw a faint, eerie glow in them. I couldn't move. My legs felt heavy. I had heard stories as a kid about creatures like this, tales told around campfires to scare us. People called it a wendigo, a creature said to roam the woods, always hungry and watching. The figure didn't move, just stood there, its hollow eyes locked onto me. I felt like a trapped animal, unsure whether to run or stay still. Every instinct told me to move, but my feet refused to obey. I took a shaky breath, finally breaking my gaze, and ducked behind a tree, hoping it wouldn't see me. I could feel my heart beating so hard it hurt, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to convince myself that this was all in my head. Minutes passed. The forest grew darker, and I knew I couldn't stay there all night. Gathering my courage, I slowly peeked around the tree. The figure was gone. Relief washed over me, but the fear remained. I knew I needed to get out of there fast. Turning on my flashlight, I walked quickly back toward the trailhead, my pace quickening with each step. Finally, I reached the parking lot, jumped into my car, and slammed the door. As I drove away, the smell hit me again, strong and sour, but it faded the farther I went from the forest. I didn't look back. I just kept driving, wanting nothing more than to put distance between myself and whatever I had seen. Even now, though I've moved further away, I sometimes feel that prickle on the back of my neck, as if something is watching, waiting in the shadows. I don't know if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me, but I know that feeling. It was cold, empty, and hungry. Whatever it was, I hope it never finds me again. But part of me knows it's still out there, lurking in the dark, waiting for the next person who wanders too far into the forest. It was a warm September night, the kind where the trees whispered secrets under a clear sky, and the stars seemed almost close enough to touch. Anna, a junior ranger in Everwood National Park, was making her usual evening rounds. Her job was straightforward: keep an eye out for stray campers, check the trails, and ensure everyone stayed safe. But that night, something strange awaited her. Anna was driving slowly along the quiet, winding forest road. Her truck's headlights flickered among the trees. Suddenly, a sharp yowl pierced the air. It wasn't a fox's cry, and it wasn't the eerie call of a coyote. It sounded almost human. Curiosity got the better of her. She slowed her truck and rolled down the window, listening. It felt as though a storm was waiting on the horizon, though the sky was clear. She shivered despite the warmth, feeling a prickle along the back of her neck. But after a few minutes, the forest was calm again. So she continued down the road. Then, just as she rounded a bend, her headlights caught something by the side of the road. At first, it looked like a large figure, a person, maybe, standing there, watching. But as Anna drew closer, her pulse quickened. This wasn't a person. The creature stood tall, with long, gangly limbs and tangled fur with clinging leaves and mud. Anna felt her hands tighten on the steering wheel. She knew the local folklore well. People spoke of strange sightings in Everwood, things they couldn't explain. But like most rangers, Anna had always brushed them off as stories told around campfires. She watched in frozen silence as the creature turned its head toward her, catching her in a sharp, gleaming gaze. Its eyes glowed, reflecting the headlights with a chilling intelligence. It was as though it was sizing her up, trying to understand her, or maybe even reading her thoughts. Anna felt an instinctual, primal fear, the kind that goes beyond reason. Despite the fear racing through her veins, Anna forced herself to stay calm. She didn't want to make any sudden movements. She knew animals could sense fear, and something about this creature told her it understood that too. She slowly reached down to her radio to call for backup, but as her fingers wrapped around it, the creature tilted its head. It was such a small gesture, almost human-like, but something about it was deeply unsettling. Then, it did something that she would never forget. It lifted its head and made a sound, like a distorted laugh. Anna's heart hammered as she realized the creature wasn't merely watching her. It was toying with her fear, reveling in her frozen expression. Before she could process what was happening, the creature took a step forward. She knew she should start the truck, but she felt rooted to the spot. The creature's gaze was locked onto her, and she couldn't look away. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a glimmer of light. Another truck was approaching from down the road. Anna's mind raced with relief. The headlights of the other ranger's vehicle shone a beam onto the road and catching the creature in its light. For a moment, it hesitated, staring at Anna with an almost disappointed look. Then, suddenly, it backed away, melting into the shadows of the forest as if it had never been there at all. The other ranger, Mark, pulled up beside her truck and rolled down his window. "Anna, are you all right?" he asked, his face etched with concern. I saw you stopped here with your hazards on. Anna took a shaky breath, nodding. I think so, she stammered, glancing toward the trees where the creature had vanished. Did you see it? Mark looked at her curiously. See what? Anna hesitated, uncertain of how to explain. She could barely believe it herself. I thought I saw something, she murmured, not wanting to sound like she was just jumping at shadows. Mark gave her a small, reassuring smile. Probably just the wind or maybe a stray animal, he said, glancing back toward the dark forest. Let's get back to base. We can finish up for the night. Anna nodded, trying to shake the lingering fear. But as she drove back with Mark following close behind, she couldn't stop glancing in her rearview mirror, half expecting to see those eerie eyes staring back at her from the shadows. When they reached the ranger station, Anna couldn't resist asking the other rangers if they'd ever seen anything unusual. Just out of curiosity, she said casually, have any of you noticed anything strange out in the woods? One of the older rangers, Jack, chuckled. Oh, we get strange stories from visitors all the time. Shadowy figures, strange sounds, even the occasional monster sighting, he said with a grin. But it's usually just overactive imaginations. Anna laughed along with him, but her mind drifted back to the creature's unsettling gaze. She knew she wasn't imagining it. Still, she kept quiet about what she had seen, tucking the memory away, even as the others traded stories about the park's odd happenings. A few months ago, something strange happened to me, and I still can't explain it. I'm a land surveyor. My job is simple. I measure and map land, usually for construction or real estate projects. It's not the type of work you'd expect to lead to anything out of the ordinary. But one day, that's exactly what happened. This event took place in northern Minnesota, near a remote area called the Boundary Waters Canoe Area. It's a vast wilderness of forests and lakes, mostly untouched by human hands. I was out there working on a project, surveying some land for a potential development. Now, I know what you're thinking. Building something near such a wild place seems wrong. But the project didn't go through, so that's a story for another time. I was out in the woods, walking through thick trees with my survey equipment, focused on a specific plot of land. I had just finished taking my last measurement and was about to pack up when I heard something. At first, I didn't know what it was. It wasn't a bird or an animal. It wasn't the wind. It was a strange humming sound. It wasn't loud or harsh, but it had a steady, pulsing quality, like a distant generator, but smoother, almost alive. Curious, I decided to follow the sound. It pulled me away from my work site. The deeper I went into the forest, the louder it became. It was almost like the sound was inside me, vibrating through my bones, making my head spin. Then, I saw it ahead of me. There was something I can only describe as a craft. It wasn't like a plane or helicopter. It was metallic, round, and smooth, with glowing patterns etched onto its surface, casting a soft blue light. The craft hovered just a few feet off the ground, and despite the loud hum, it was completely still, like it had been there for ages. I stood there for a long time watching it. I wasn't scared. It was more like I was hypnotized. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. And then, something even stranger happened. The side of the craft opened up, and out stepped three beings. They were tall, with long arms and legs, and their eyes were big, dark and unblinking. Their skin, or whatever you would call it, was pale, almost translucent, and it shimmered in the light like the surface of a bubble. They stood there, just staring at me. I couldn't move. It felt like time itself had slowed down. My body froze, and all I could do was watch them. They didn't look aggressive or threatening. They just watched me back, as if they were as curious about me as I was about them. Their heads tilted slightly, almost like a dog trying to figure out something unfamiliar. The one in the middle stepped forward slowly. It raised its hand, if you could call it that. Its arm was long and thin, with extra joints that made the movement graceful and almost fluid. When its hand reached out, something strange happened. It was as if my mind opened up, and in a flash, I understood something. It wasn't words, but it was a flood of emotions and images. It was like my mind and theirs were connected for a brief moment. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt something. I understood that they were explorers. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to learn, to understand. They were studying this world, just as I was studying the land. The connection lasted only a few moments. I felt like I was seeing the universe in a completely different way. It was like I was no longer just a person standing in the woods. I was part of something much grander. When the connection broke, the being lowered its hand. The humming sound came back, and the aliens slowly turned back to the craft. They didn't say anything. They just looked at me one last time, almost like a silent goodbye. Then the craft rose into the air and disappeared into the sky. It was gone in an instant, and the sound faded with it. I stood there for a long time, unable to move. The stars began to appear in the sky, and I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Had I really seen what I thought I'd seen? Had I really made contact with beings from another world? The next morning, I packed up and headed back home, but the world felt different. The things I once thought were important, my job, the land I measured, seemed so small compared to what I had just witnessed. I spent hours researching UFO sightings, reading stories of encounters with alien beings, but nothing I found matched what had happened to me. A few weeks later, I was contacted by a group of people who called themselves Seekers. They were scientists, researchers, and others who had experienced strange phenomena like mine. They had heard about my encounter, and they wanted to talk. They believed me. And more importantly, they helped me understand that what happened wasn't just a random event. Once, a young traveler decided to explore a hidden ruin buried deep in the misty mountains. The ruin was a mysterious place, long abandoned, with ancient stone walls cracked by time and covered in green moss. Strange carvings lined the walls, twisted and shadowy, as if they were faces from another world, staring out in silence. With each step, the traveler felt an odd chill that settled into their bones. The ruin seemed completely still, with no signs of life, yet there was a strange energy in the air. The deeper they went, the stronger the feeling grew. But each time the traveler turned to look behind them, only shadows filled the empty space. The air grew colder, and a soft whisper, too quiet to understand, seemed to echo through the stone halls. Intrigued by the eerie beauty of the place, the traveler decided to take a picture. They held up their camera and snapped a photo of the crumbling stone walls and creeping shadows. Satisfied, they decided to leave the ruin before the sun set completely. But as they turned to go, the feeling of being watched grew so strong that they almost ran, sensing the gaze of unseen eyes following them out. Later that night, in the safety of their room, the traveler looked through the pictures they had taken. Most showed the ruin in its haunting beauty, empty and silent. But then, they reached the last photo, the one taken right before they left, and their hearts stopped. In the picture, behind the spot where they had stood, a figure was faintly visible, pale and blurred, like a ghost. The figure's face was sunken and sorrowful, its hollow eyes empty, staring directly into the camera. It looked ancient, worn with age, as if it had waited there for centuries, and its hand reached out as though trying to grasp the traveler. Shaken, The traveler tried to delete the photo, but no matter what they did, it wouldn't go away. The cursed image reappeared again and again, haunting every device they transferred it to. Soon, rumors of the ghostly photo spread. Those who looked at it for too long said they felt a negative energy. It is said that the ghost in the photograph was once a guardian of the ruin, cursed to remain there forever. Now, it waits for the next traveler to come, hoping to escape its lonely prison, lurking in the shadows and reaching out to anyone who dares capture its image.